Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, to borrow from an old vaudeville tune, New Orleans could have sung "Yes, We Have No Bananas" this week, as the once ballyhooed return of Chiquita Bananas to our docks went in reverse, and the business split back to Gulfport. We'll examine why. In sports, we've learned a bit more about Tom Benson's deal with his estranged family. And in politics, we'll look at how the Clintons have fared on the ballot in Louisiana. We begin, though, with the shooting tragedy in Baton Rouge and the implications it might have had last night in Dallas. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. Kevin Magill, reporter, The Associated Press. Kathy Finn, freelance business writer. And Jessica Williams, reporter, The New Orleans Advocate. I'm going to go over to Kevin first, and this week has just turned out to be such a disturbing, sad week, not just for Louisiana, for Baton Rouge, but for the country, with what happened, of course, also in Dallas and what happened early in the week in Baton Rouge and in Minnesota. Now, you've been covering this. What are you learning over these days?
This raises both short-term and long-term questions. Short-term questions: what really happened to Alton Sterling? Why did he have to be taken down so violently? As was shown in one video, it appeared that certainly his left arm was pinned when police shot him. And was he really were they really in imminent danger of him getting to a gun that we believe was found in his pocket and being shot themselves?
And this was the African-American male in Baton Rouge.
African-American man in Baton Rouge who had been eking out a living in part by selling CDs in front of a convenience store late at night in North Baton Rouge. Longer-term questions. This is one in a series, as we all know now, of police shootings. African-American men shot at the hands of police, sometimes unarmed. In this case, he may have had a gun on him. It appears that he had a gun on him, but was he really a threat at that point? It was followed up the next day, of course, by the tragedy in Minnesota. A motorist shot, and the aftermath caught by his girlfriend in a Facebook video. Long-term questions: how do you prevent that? This is. I talked to two people yesterday from who have different points of view. They come at it from different aspects, but they both started speaking about training. Would better trained police officers not have shot Alton Sterling under the same circumstances? Might they have arrived there and avoided the need to take him down violently? Might they have de-escalated the situation before they got to the point where one of them apparently felt like he had to use lethal force? That takes money. Training takes money. Improving a police force takes money. We here in New Orleans know that. We were just talking about that a little while ago because we're under a federal consent decree, and it took a long time. If you'll think back to 2010, when the mayor invited the Justice Department to begin looking at the New Orleans police force, it was 2 years before that consent decree was reached, and then there was more discussions of it in court. Why? There were negotiations going on because the reforms are expensive. And that brings me to Raymond Jetson, the former state lawmaker who is now a pastor. His church is 4 blocks from where Mr. Sterling died, and he talks about until communities are willing to put money into police training, into police reform, and into economic development in areas like North Baton Rouge, he is not optimistic that things like this won't keep happening.
And to piggyback a little bit on that, we saw earlier today the mayor held a press conference, but he's also been about the shooting, but he's also been doing community budget meetings that have been happening throughout the city in New Orleans. And the gavel that he's been banging is that, you say that you want, decreased response times. You say that you want a better trained police force. We see the events that are happening in Baton Rouge, in Dallas. We see the events that are happening in Minnesota. But it takes money to do those things. And, I'm coming to you, the people, and I'm asking you what your priorities are, but I'm also saying I'm going to need money to fund them. Yeah. Now, he also said this morning that he had a meeting with NOPD, and he's confident that in New Orleans they are prepared if anything should, God forbid, anything should happen, like in Dallas. He he has full confidence that they're prepared to handle it, and full confidence that they will be prepared to handle the protests that are scheduled today in light of those events.
Kathy, you were in Baton Rouge the day after the incident happened with Mr. Sterling. What were you hearing? What was the mood like?
Well, the mood was, they were upset, of course, and they were angry, although they were peaceful throughout the time that I was there, and I think in the following day as well. The crowd kept growing throughout the day, and particularly as they started a prayer vigil that evening. But I think they were kind of united because the store owner in this case is the one who shot the most revealing video of the incident, and he stepped out of the store immediately when he saw the police cars pull up, and so he videoed the whole thing from his iPhone. And he insisted from the beginning that Mr. Sterling posed no threat to the police. Now, he was a friend of Mr. Sterling's. Mr. Sterling had been selling CDs at that spot for at least 2 or 3 years, and they were friends and they listened to music together and that sort of thing. But he just said that there was no justification for what happened, and that, of course, tended, and he was speaking quite freely about it that day, so that tended to kind of fan the flames of the anger in the crowd, hearing this from him, somebody who was an eyewitness to the whole thing. And when that video got out, of course, it got worse and worse.
I think it was key that both the local authorities and the state authorities immediately went to the Justice Department and asked them to step in and investigate this.
Yeah, that was a smart thing to do.
I think it was. I think the community has a lot more faith that people who are not that involved with the Baton Rouge Police Department will be looking at it and trying to get to the bottom of what happened.
That also brings up, though, the longer-term question of what do you do to restore confidence in the police department, particularly in the black community, when you've got this series of events going on. And it's all around the country, but it can affect any city, just seeing what's going on in a different city. And I don't know, how do you get that back once that confidence is lost?
And of course, we saw the governor step up immediately too. As you said, he called for the Department of Justice to lead the investigation here. Are we hearing anything else? Are they disclosing anything else over these days?
I think it's going to be a while before you hear anything from official law enforcement sources, because there's more. We know there's more than those 2 videos. There's surveillance video at the store,
which they confiscated without letting the owner of the store see it.
Right.
Yeah, and there were body cameras, which the problem there is that they apparently became dislodged immediately. People start thinking about. Again, that goes to that training question. If nothing else, assuming that the officers were using them in good faith, were they trained in properly securing them? Is the equipment up to snuff? Should it have come apart that easily or come away from the uniform? But they were. I believe at a news conference there was some reference that they may have still been operating even if they weren't in the best position. There's a lot that's going to be looked at by those investigators, and it's not going to come out. It's not going to come out fast, and we're not going to learn it easily. But it'll come out eventually.
But as far as the Dallas side of this incident, I think it's fair to remind people that there is no evidence that we know of that the Dallas Police Department did anything wrong at all.
No.
In fact, if you listen to the coverage last night, people who follow police departments are pretty much high in their praise of the procedures of the Dallas Police Department. So they were truly a victim of all of this.
Yeah, what happened in Dallas last night got some of us thinking in the office here about, it was 43 years ago, and 5 police officers died at the hand of a sniper in Dallas, and there were 5 police officers killed, not all of them on the same night in the same incident, but by Mark Essex in that 1973 killing spree that ended at the what was then the Howard Johnson's downtown hotel. And again, he was targeting. He was a black man targeting white people and police officers, which shows just kind of a tragically reminiscent of what was going on.
So protests still are ongoing in Baton Rouge?
I think there still are people out there and doing the memorials to Mr. Sterling and that sort of thing. So that could be going on for some time. But it's at the heart of a residential community. I mean, that store is in the heart of a lot of housing.
Monitoring some of that today, you get the feeling that there's some talk of economic boycotts, and although I'm not sure yet that they're sure exactly what the result of that would be, because what does government have to do right now to make an immediate change in in a police culture if that's what the problem was, and how do you address the other end of it immediately by bringing economic opportunity to a section of the city that has been missing it for a long time.
You know, one thing that I've consistently heard by members of the community, just seeing interviews with individuals, just community members, people calling for peace. Let's this be a time of unity and peace, peaceful protest, and also let's find out what really went on. Let's let this investigation run its course and find out what happened here. Also, it brings to mind, too, what law enforcement will say is that this is a very difficult job. We are in situations that are life-threatening, and we're here, you know, we are there to protect. We can't protect if we are injured. We have to protect ourselves. So, you know, and certainly what comes to mind is what happened just a few weeks ago with the death of a Jefferson Parish sheriff's deputy. It is certainly a dangerous profession. That's where training definitely, once again, can't emphasize it
that
enough.
shows the complexity of everything going on here, because the sad aftermath of that was that Sheriff Norman had to felt compelled to ask federal authorities to help him with an investigation because of a video of the arrest of the suspect. Whether undue violence was done at that point. So there's just a lot of things to consider in these cases.
And Jessica, let me ask you also, Jeff, if you can touch on a little bit more what the mayor had to say regarding our community and how to handle this situation.
He stressed for peace, just as you mentioned. You know, he encouraged citizens to go out and protest, but he said, please do it peacefully. We are equipped at NOPD. He stressed that the role of NOPD in this instance was to be protectors to the folks that went out to protest, was to help them. You know, they met with the organizers that are staging these two protests today at 4 and at 6 p.m. over at Phillip Street, where Eric Harris was fatally shot in February by Jefferson Parish deputies in Talese Circle. They've talked with those organizers. They've let them know best practices. There was a plan to symbolically have the sound of a gunshot go off, and folks were going to lay down, you know, as a way to pay tribute to what had happened. They said, we want to make sure that, you know, this is just a sound of a gun, that this is not an actual gun, you know, working with those protesters to allow them the opportunity to express their constitutionally protected rights, but at the same time stressing safety and stressing peace.
Peaceful protest. Errol, you wanted to talk a little bit on what Kevin just touched on, the Howard Johnson incident.
Yeah, and you know, there are a couple of other parallels to it in that today we learned that what we think the main trigger man in Dallas was in the military. He was in the Army Reserve, and of course, Mark Essex had been in the Navy. But also, you know, a sniper from a high place. And at the time of the Howard Johnson sniping, it seemed like there were multiple people that were doing the shooting. I mean, so many people were hit that a lot of people were saying this is part of a conspiracy. There were a lot of people involved with this, and we still don't know the full case in Dallas.
This afternoon, and as a matter of fact, there was some talk that they may have overestimated the number of people involved, and it appears now that there was a single shooter, just as it was found 43 years ago in the Essex case.
And in fact, a lot of what they were responding to was ricochets that were going back and forth, and so it does show the power of a person with military training and a high-powered weapon that they can give the impression of multiple shooters. And so they had those two, and also both of them in their statements and the things that they wrote said part of their mission was that they wanted to kill police.
That was, like you said, 43 years ago, something we didn't have then, we did have now, we do have now, social media. I mean, what a tremendous change. That just brought it to us really immediately. Look at what happened in the situation in Minnesota.
And also we should mention at the time, Mitchell Andrews' dad, Moon, was the mayor at the time. So
at the time, well, just a very sad time for the nation, all of us with heavy hearts. All right, we're going to move over to a different topic now, over to Kathy, and you know, still heavy hearts over at the port because we lost Chiquita Bananas.
Yeah, who knew that it was going to happen that quickly? I mean, we have talked about it before, that it was a possibility. I think about in April or May, they started discussing the possibility that something didn't seem to be going right with the banana trade. And so now we have a confirmation that Chiquita is indeed leaving and returning to Gulfport. I think this was maybe never that solid from the beginning, because at the time the port was negotiating with the company, they were in the midst of being acquired by another company out of Brazil. And that acquisition actually occurred after the deal was done with New Orleans. And apparently the new owners just never really took to the idea of bringing that trade over to New Orleans very well, and kind of kept their eye on Gulfport. Simultaneously, Gulfport kept up the pressure and decided they weren't going to let it go, because losing that trade to begin with was a much bigger blow to Gulfport than it was to benefit New Orleans. Although it was very important to New Orleans, it was a bigger blow to Gulfport to lose it. And so they stayed with it. And one of the things that they did is they took money that they had gotten for Hurricane Katrina rebuilding, and they applied like $30 million to buy these huge new cranes that are capable of quickly offloading the big ships that are coming through the Panama Canal now. Now that the canal has been widened, they have what they call these Panamax ships, and they're much larger than the standard ships that were carrying containers. So Gulfport invested in these cranes that will reach all the way across those ships and more quickly offload the cargo, which gives them a faster turnaround for the ships in port.
And also, the ripening facility always stayed there.
And the
never
ripening
did come over here.
facility never did get all the way over here. So the Chiquita owners say that was a big factor. Those cranes and the work that Gulfport did to upgrade their wharves was a big factor in getting them back there.
And another factor is that they mentioned, and this may be a product of our own success, is that they mentioned the congestion here. And I was talking to a man the other day in the port business, and he says, any day you go along Chapatula Street, and you got this long line of trucks that are waiting to get in there.
Yeah, well, that is a problem. I mean, it really is, because it's the truck congestion that they're talking about. It's not, the ship congestion. It's that how do you get in and out of the port, and it is difficult, despite the improvements that they've made in the ground transportation and the access to the port. Getting those containers offloaded and carried out it's a chore, and it's easier probably in Gulfport than it is here because of our very dense situation in the city.
Well, the port officials certainly worked hard to keep the bananas here.
Right.
It's going to be a big economic impact.
It is. It certainly will have an impact. This constitutes probably 4 to 5% of the total container trade in New Orleans. And in the last year and a half, the port has set records with container trade. Container trade boosted by the banana trade. And so seeing that go away, they have to go out and hit the bricks again to find new sources of cargo. Of course, they're doing that all the time anyway, but now they have to replace that.
And it hurts personally too, because historically that trade developed out of New Orleans, and New Orleans was once such a global center for
it
the
seemed a real victory
for the
to
banana
get it
trade.
back, and then
the
we lost
banana
it
trade
again.
left us, over 40 years or so ago. It's been gone for a while.
Mm-hmm.
But the state, in order to entice it back, put up some money to improve facilities, did it not?
They did. They had an incentive package that they gave to Chiquita, and my understanding of it is that it was an incremental thing. It was performance-based, so they gave payments year by year. So the Economic Development Director says that what has been expended by the state so far really did get the benefit back in. The cargo did come to New Orleans. One place where they didn't get it back was in the ripening facility. They invested at least $1 million in that, and that trade never did come over here.
Okay, well, we're sorry to see him go.
Yes, we have no bananas again.
Yes, we have no bananas now. Okay, over to Errol. Clinton's
We're still the home of Bananas Foster, though. They can't,
They
can't take that away.
From us, no, indeed. Clinton's in Louisiana. How have they fared on the ballot?
They've done pretty well. When Bill Clinton first ran in '92, he carried Louisiana. He carried it because he had a plurality because of Ross Perot, who siphoned some votes away from George Bush. It would have been close had not been for Ross Perot, but the way the Electoral College works, it's not a majority, it's who gets the most votes. And so he got all of Louisiana's electoral votes. And then 4 years later, when he was president, he got a majority. And this time it was against Robert Dole, who was never really very popular in the South. And so the two times that Bill Clinton ran, he did well in Louisiana as he did in the South. I think he had another factor that was going for him, and that is, I think in those two times, Bill Clinton was perceived as being from the South. I mean, he was the governor of Arkansas. I don't think anybody thinks of Hillary Clinton as an Arkansas person. A bit of Chicago and a bit of New York. There's not a lot of polling, at least I'm aware of, that's going on in this race. I don't think Louisiana is that much important to the people who were doing all the numbers in the campaign, but when there was polling, it's pretty much shown Trump in the high 40s and Clinton in the high 30s, and so it looks like it's that Trump's going to win. But some of the people need to be reminded about presidential races is that presidential elections are really 50 statewide elections and not one national election. And in that sense, sometimes our vote doesn't count as much as people think, because our vote is only relevant in terms as it affects the total in Louisiana. Okay, so if there was, if nationwide, if it came down to 2 votes, our votes wouldn't necessarily matter. But our vote's only important in terms of breaking the tie here. And so it's a different sort of equation that goes on here. And because of the Electoral College, people who run campaigns are able to pinpoint the most electorally important states, the ones that pivot, and really put all the edge there. So I don't think we're going to see a whole lot of activity here.
All right, well, we'll be seeing some activity, though, over these months to come. And, you know, everybody's attention has been sort of diverted away the past couple of days, that's for sure, from the presidential race. Okay, over to Jessica now. And back to something that the mayor had to say, and this was regarding the State of the City address. And he articulated a plan to try to create more affordable housing units here. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, one of the things that was key about what the mayor talked about 2 weeks ago was we want to build or preserve 7,500 affordable housing units by 2021. Now, the preserve part is key because that may mean that, you know, instead of building a brand new house and renting it to someone of lower income, we may just make it cheaper for someone to keep the house that they already have. So let's come up with innovative ways to reduce people's light bill. Let's change out their light bulbs through our program that we have that can do that for free. You know, let's make it easier on people who are living in squalid conditions. Let's tighten up on their landlords so that the landlords have to fix these very, you know, just awful conditions that they've got these folks living in without having to raise their rent to do it. So let's create a registry that will require all landlords to register their property and to submit to inspections. And that's one of the things that several members of the council have been working towards for more than a year. But Landrew, about 2 weeks ago when he came out with the State of the City address, essentially gave his stamp of approval to some of these proposals that were already kind of in the works and already being discussed in private, if not in public. Another thing that his housing plan did, it borrowed a lot from a group called Housing NOLA. They also came out with a plan, I believe, for 5,000 units by 2021. He's actually committing a little bit more, and he's actually putting a little bit more money behind it to do it. But it also draws heavily from that plan's recommendations. And one of the things that he did within the past week was that he went ahead and put out an RFP, request for proposals, for a private firm to come in and create that rental registry. Now that's something that a lot of the landlords in the city have balked at. They've said, well, we would support this, but we want to make sure that it's done in a way in which it doesn't create an undue burden upon us. And we want to make sure that it's done in a way in which it doesn't accomplish the very thing that the mayor is setting out to avoid, which is raising rent. Because if we have to make sure that our properties comply with all of these regulations that you have, that's going to cost money. And so the City Council is working with those landlords. They hope to be able to pass an ordinance about that registry by the end of the year. Meanwhile, the RFP is going out to select a firm that would be able to create it. You would have to go online, register your property, submit to inspections. If you fail the inspection the first time, you'd have to be re-inspected and you'd have to pay every time that you did it. And this database would be entirely funded by the fees that landlords have to pay. So as you can imagine, we're going to hear a lot of input from landlords on this as it becomes closer and closer to reality.
And one of the reasons why we have such a focus now on affordable housing is because rents have just been going through the roof.
Rents have skyrocketed and wages have stayed the same, and that's been the problem since Katrina. And a lot of what you see with newcomers who have come to New Orleans post-storm to help us rebuild, they've caused property values in some areas to skyrocket. And the folks who have been here, who were able before Katrina to get a decent 2-bedroom for about $500 or $600, you can't find those prices anymore.
And then we have short-term rentals in the mix too, but that is a whole other
That's a
story.
whole other kettle of fish there. The mayor is working, the City Planning Commission is working on a proposal to regulate or deregulate short-term rentals in the city, and we anxiously anticipate
what's going to be coming with that.
Yes.
Like you said, more discussion ahead. Okay, thanks a lot, Jessica. Quickly over to Kathy now. And anything that we have found out at all about the Benson settlement with his family?
Well, we have indications, I think. On July 20th, the court has mandated that the parties come back to court and report on the progress and hopefully report that they have signed all the documents and that they have the requisite approvals from from the NFL and the NBA, which is required in order to do whatever they are doing with the stock, the non-controlling shares that Tom Benson's heirs have in hand. Rita Benson LeBlanc gave an interview recently that I'm sure you've talked about before here with Street and Smith's Sports Business Journal, and she made some kind of odd statements in it. One of the headline grabber was that she said, no matter what happens in the litigation, I will always be a partial owner of the Saints. If that truly is a fair statement after the settlement has occurred or the proposal has occurred, that would mean that Tom Benson was not successful in buying out his heirs the stock in both the Saints and the Pelicans. A document that he filed prior to that settlement being announced showed that he valued, his experts, valued the non-controlling interests of the heirs in the Saints at about $835 million. And clearly, if that's what he offered them, it didn't work then, if they are indeed still owners.
Well, the NBA and the NFL have to agree to the terms of the settlement. Will that perhaps make things public or not, do you think?
It's hard to say. I would think that what we might see from the NFL and the NBA, assuming this gets ironed out and assuming that a settlement gets signed by all the parties, they might issue a statement saying, we're happy to say the New Orleans Saints, the ownership is stable, Tom Benson is in control, and nobody has to worry about anything without being specific about whether the heirs are still involved or not.
Okay, all right.
But who knows?
All right, Kathy, thanks a
Isn't
lot.
the indication, though, that issues involved is probably non-voting, a non-voting owner, and that makes a difference.
Yeah, well, they are non-voting owners for sure. They're non-controlling owners, so the control is not in
And
question.
we now have to move to looking ahead. I'm going over to Errol.
Yeah. Well, it seems like the city of Kenner is always having elections for interim mayors because being mayor of Kenner is such a good political perch that the mayors get elected to a higher office, as is the case when Mike Guinea was elected parish president. So qualifying begins this month, July 20th and 22nd, for mayor of Kenner for the election, which will be in November.
Okay. Kevin?
Monday in federal court, jury selection begins in the federal case against Eric Nunez and Brandon Licciardi. They are the co-defendants of Darren Sharper in the federal and in the Louisiana state case involving drugs and sexual assault. Jury will be selected, then there'll be a suspension. Trial expected to begin late in the week, and we should see Sharper testifying.
Interesting. Okay, thanks.
Watch for that July 20th date in the Benson matter. It could bring an end to this case, or there is the possibility that the parties could come back and say, we're at odds again and we haven't worked it out.
Okay.
So we'll see.
We'll see. Thanks, Kathy. Jessica?
Speaking of budgeting and resources, we've got several more community meetings planned with Mayor Mitch Landrieu getting out to New Orleans East, getting out to several other parts of the city. So please come out and make your voices be heard on the 2017 budget.
Okay, good. And I have something to add, too. Tomorrow night, Errol Laborde is recognized with a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Press Club of New Orleans. Congratulations to Errol. Well deserved.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for being here. Thank you all for joining us. And we'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.